Clara was sitting alone in her small, cozy apartment on a rainy evening, the soft hum of rain against the windows mixing with the quiet tick of the clock on the wall, when her phone buzzed, and a name appeared on the screen that made her heart almost stop: Marcus. She hadn't heard from him in decades, not since their lives had split into different paths, not since those 4 years of a past that had been intense, thrilling, and reckless, yet somehow beautiful in its own chaotic way. She stared at the message, unable to believe her eyes, a shiver running down her spine as she read the words slowly, carefully, almost hoping that her mind was playing tricks on her. Did you ever really love me, or was it all just a game? Her fingers hovered over the phone, hesitant, unsure if she should reply immediately, because answering him would mean opening a door she had carefully locked long ago, and yet not answering would feel like denying a part of herself that had shaped who she had become. Memories came rushing back uninvited, the laughter echoing in sunlit cafes where they had once shared dreams, the stolen glances filled with longing, the soft warmth of his hand against hers, the quiet nights when words were unnecessary, and their hearts spoke for them, wild and unguarded. She remembered how Marcus had been larger than life, confident, vibrant, his laughter filling rooms and making even ordinary moments feel extraordinary, and how in return she had given him all the love she had to offer, unfiltered and unreserved, though at times it had terrified her to admit it. Those years had been full of passion and mistakes, long drives with the windows down and music blaring, conversations that stretched into dawn, secrets whispered in the dark, and promises that had seemed eternal but were eventually broken not by a lack of love but by circumstance, by choices made under the weight of responsibilities, family, and the inexorable pull of time. Clara could still see the cafe where they had spent countless afternoons, the table by the window where they had shared their hopes and fears, the way sunlight had fallen on his face, illuminating the intensity of his eyes, the quiet moments when words were inadequate, and the silence was louder than any argument. She remembered the heartbreak when they parted, the ache that lingered in her chest for weeks, the nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering if life had dealt them an unfair hand, and the years afterward where she carried fragments of him quietly, tucked into the corners of her mind where they could not be touched by anyone else. The rain outside matched the storm inside her as she read and reread Marcus's message, feeling a pang of longing mixed with fear, nostalgia, and a complicated tangle of emotions she thought she had mastered long ago. She thought about her current life, the routines, the people she cared for, the responsibilities she had taken on, and yet this single message threatened to pull her into a whirlwind of memories, emotions, and what-ifs that she had carefully tried to leave behind. Her fingers finally brushed the screen as if drawn by a force stronger than her own hesitation, but she paused, realizing that this wasn't just a message, it was an invitation to revisit a chapter of her life that had been sealed away, a challenge to confront feelings she had long buried, to face a man who had once been her world and who now questioned the very authenticity of her past love. She could remember the exact weight of his gaze when he had once held her, the way his laughter had lifted her spirits on the darkest days, and the softness in his voice that had made her feel both vulnerable and invincible at the same time. Those 4 years had been a storm, a whirlwind of desire, dreams, and learning, shaping her in ways she still couldn't fully understand, leaving imprints on her heart that time had softened but never erased. And now, decades later, Marcus was standing at the edge of her memories, knocking on a door she had locked with care, forcing her to confront a truth she hadn't faced in years, that love doesn't always fade quietly, that the past can resurface when least expected, and that even after decades, some feelings never truly die. She thought of the letters they had written, the late-night calls that stretched into the early morning, the gentle touches that carried promises unspoken, and the arguments that ended in laughter, all of it rushing back with a clarity that startled her, making her wonder if she had truly moved on or if she had merely learned to live with the absence of him. Clara's chest tightened as she imagined Marcus reading her life now through the lens of her past, questioning her emotions, and she felt both a longing to defend the truth of her heart and a fear of reopening old wounds that might never fully heal. The room felt smaller, the rain louder, the memories sharper, as if the universe itself was urging her to confront a part of herself she had carefully avoided, to face the man who had once consumed her thoughts, and to decide whether to respond, to explain, to reconnect, or to let the past remain exactly where it had been, beautiful, painful, and untouchable. She thought about the younger version of herself, the one who had loved fiercely and without hesitation, the one who had dared to dream and to feel everything with an intensity that sometimes frightened even her, and she realized that part of her still lived within her, alive and stubborn, refusing to be silenced. And yet, the adult Clara, the one who had learned caution, patience, and the weight of consequences, hesitated, caught between who she had been and who she had become, understanding that replying meant vulnerability, that opening her heart again after decades carried risks she might not be prepared for, and yet feeling an undeniable pull, a gravity that pulled her toward the man who had once defined her world. She thought about the lives they had led separately, the paths that had diverged, the people they had become, and yet the single message brought it all crashing down, reminding her that some connections, some loves, some truths, are never entirely lost. Clara imagined the conversation they might have, the explanations, the apologies, the laughter, the tears, and the awkward silences, and she knew that it wouldn't be simple, that the past and present would collide in ways that could be both beautiful and painful, that love has a way of challenging time, distance, and reason itself. Her mind wandered to the last time she had truly seen him, the look in his eyes as they had parted, the promise of friendship, the unspoken acknowledgement of what could never be, and how both of them had moved forward, yet carried each other in their hearts quietly, invisibly, like a secret no one else could know. And now, decades later, here he was, a message, a spark, a reminder of the love that had once set her world on fire, leaving her heart racing, her thoughts tumbling, and her soul questioning everything she had believed about moving on, closure, and the endurance of deep, unforgettable love. Clara's hand hovered over the phone, a mixture of fear, hope, and longing washing over her, realizing that her next move could change everything, that a simple reply could open a floodgate of emotions, memories, and perhaps, possibilities she had never considered, and yet she also knew that doing nothing might leave her with a quiet regret that could last another lifetime. The rain outside continued to fall, relentless, rhythmic, and as she looked out the window, seeing the drops race each other down the glass, she felt an echo of the storm inside her heart, understanding that sometimes love returns not to rekindle but to remind us of its power, its permanence, and its ability to shape who we are long after it seems to have faded. And so Clara sat, alone, trembling, remembering, hoping, fearing, knowing that the past had arrived at her doorstep in the form of a single message, and that in that quiet, rainy evening, everything she thought she had left behind was alive once more, waiting for her to decide whether to reach out, to confront, to forgive, and perhaps, to finally tell Marcus the truth that had never changed. She had loved him, fiercely, deeply, completely, and even now, decades later, that love had never truly left her. Clara woke the next morning with Marcus's words still echoing in her mind, the rain from the previous evening leaving the city damp and quiet, and she found herself unable to shake the memories that had surged back so violently, memories she had thought carefully tucked away, neatly filed behind the years and responsibilities that had shaped her life since then. She thought about the first time she met him, how his smile had seemed to light up a room and how she had been instantly drawn to his confidence, the ease with which he could make anyone feel seen, the way he had listened when she spoke, nodding and laughing in just the right places, making her feel as if her thoughts and feelings mattered more than anything else in the world, and how quickly their connection had grown, from shy conversations to long walks under streetlights, to hours spent in cafes sharing dreams, fears, and secrets that neither had revealed to anyone else. She remembered the intensity of their first real kiss, the electricity that had shot through her body as if the world itself had paused to let them exist in that single moment, how she had felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, and how he had held her hand through the panic, grounding her in a way that made everything feel possible. The following days had been a whirlwind of laughter, whispered promises, and stolen moments where the world outside disappeared, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of joy and longing that seemed unbreakable at the time. Yet underneath that euphoria there had always been the knowledge that life outside their bubble was complicated, that the paths they were on could not remain perfectly aligned forever, and that choices would have to be made, sacrifices endured, and hearts inevitably broken. Clara thought of the arguments too, the rare moments of frustration and misunderstanding, which in retrospect had been so full of passion and emotion that they had only served to deepen their connection rather than weaken it. The way Marcus would run his fingers through his hair when exasperated, the way she would sigh and roll her eyes. The sharp words tempered by laughter and the unspoken understanding that they were two imperfect people trying desperately to hold on to something extraordinary. And how those conflicts had shaped their love into something more resilient, more alive, and more unforgettable. She remembered the rainy afternoons spent in their favorite bookstore, hands brushing as they reached for the same novel, laughing at the coincidence, and how he had whispered a line from one of the books into her ear that had made her heart race and cheeks burn, a private joke that no one else could understand, and she could still feel the warmth of his body near hers, the scent of him that lingered even after he had left, a memory that could never truly fade, no matter how many years passed. And then there were the nights in her apartment, the music soft in the background, their conversation meandering from trivial things to the deepest fears and desires, moments when they were raw and honest in ways that few could ever be, the way his hand would find hers on the sofa, squeezing gently, conveying 1,000 words without speaking a single one, and how in those nights she had believed in a love that was timeless, limitless, and completely consuming. But Clara also remembered the first real signs that life was beginning to pull them apart, the letters from family, the responsibilities that could not be ignored, the dreams that demanded sacrifices neither of them wanted to make but had to, and the gradual realization that their paths, no matter how aligned their hearts were, could not continue on the same trajectory, the heartbreak of seeing him leave for opportunities she could not join, the quiet ache in her chest as she watched him walk away, feeling simultaneously proud of him and devastated that the life she had imagined with him was slipping through her fingers. She thought of the letters and calls that followed, months filled with longing, apologies, and attempts to stay connected despite the distance, the nights when she would cry herself to sleep while holding the phone, imagining that he was near, and the mornings when she forced herself to get up and face a world that seemed duller without him, a world that had not been designed for the love they had shared but that they had nevertheless tried to make meaningful in their own ways. Clara remembered the small, meaningful gestures that had left lasting imprints on her heart, the way he remembered her favorite song and played it when she least expected it, the way he left notes tucked into her books, the way he always listened even when she was overwhelmed, and the countless little ways in which he had made her feel valued, cherished, and truly seen, and she realized that those gestures, though seemingly ordinary at the time, had become the foundation of her memory of love, of connection, and of intimacy that was still very much alive within her, stubbornly refusing to fade. As she sat at her kitchen table sipping coffee, she realized how much of her life had been shaped by those years with Marcus, how many choices she had made with a quiet echo of his presence in her heart, and how even now, decades later, the sudden reappearance of his name on her phone could send her spiraling back into emotions she thought she had learned to live without. The pull was magnetic, irresistible, and terrifying all at once. She thought about how love had changed them both, how they had grown, evolved, and become different people, yet the essence of what they had shared, the laughter, the longing, the joy, the heartbreak, remained intact, a thread running through time, unbroken and unyielding. And she understood that this was the moment when she had to decide whether to allow herself to be swept back into that current, to risk reopening old wounds, to embrace the uncertainty, and to confront the reality of what Marcus had written, or to maintain the careful distance she had spent years building, preserving her life from the turbulence of emotions that could once again take hold. Clara's mind was a whirlwind of thought, of flashbacks, of longing, and of fear. She could see the younger version of herself laughing with Marcus under the golden sunset, hear his voice calling her name with affection and urgency, feel his hand holding hers in moments of quiet intimacy, and remember the nights when love had felt infinite and unbreakable, and yet she also knew the weight of the present, the responsibilities, the people who depended on her, the life she had built without him, and how re-engaging with that past could change everything she had carefully crafted, for better or worse. Her emotions were chaotic, a storm mirroring the one outside, a mixture of nostalgia, regret, hope, and longing, as she weighed every possibility, replayed every memory, and imagined every outcome, knowing that each path carried its own consequences, yet understanding deep in her heart that some loves, no matter how distant or impossible they seemed, never truly die. The thought of responding, even with a single word, made her chest tighten and her hands shake, because it would mean acknowledging a part of herself that she had hidden, confronting a man who had been a pivotal part of her emotional world, and allowing herself to feel fully again the intensity, the vulnerability, and the passion that had defined those 4 unforgettable years, and she realized that she could not ignore it, could not let it fade into silence, because doing so would be denying a truth that had lived quietly within her for decades. Clara understood that Marcus's message was not just a question, but a challenge, an invitation to explore the past and confront the feelings she had carried silently all these years, and as she looked out the window at the rain streaming down, mirrored by the tears she refused to shed yet, she felt the undeniable pull of what had once been, the inevitability of the emotions that refused to be silenced, and the quiet, powerful truth that she had loved him, truly and completely, and perhaps, despite everything, still did. And in that moment, alone with the rain, the memories, and the phone that held his words, Clara made a silent decision to face the past, to confront the emotions she had buried, and to allow herself to acknowledge the truth that would guide her next steps, knowing that the journey ahead would be filled with uncertainty, longing, and the raw power of a love that had never really left her heart, waiting patiently for the moment when they might meet again, when words would have the chance to heal, to clarify, and perhaps, to reignite something neither of them had thought possible after all these years. Clara had barely slept the night before, her mind restless with images, memories, and the nervous anticipation of seeing Marcus again. The thought of him appearing in her life after decades filling her with a mix of excitement, fear, and longing she could not suppress, and when she walked into the quiet corner cafe that morning, the scent of coffee and baked pastries mingling with the soft hum of conversation, her heart skipped as soon as she saw him, sitting at the small window table, older now, but still unmistakably him, his posture relaxed, yet there was an intensity in his eyes that made her stomach flutter and her chest tighten, a magnetic pull she had not felt in years, and in that instant the years melted away, leaving only the memory of the young love they had shared and the undeniable tension of the present moment, charged with everything unspoken between them. Marcus's gaze met hers as she approached, a mixture of disbelief, caution, and longing crossing his face, and for a long, silent moment, neither spoke, the world around them fading into background noise as they took in the sight of each other, measuring how time had shaped them, wondering if the connection that had once been so fierce could survive the decades apart, and as Clara reached the table, her hands trembling slightly, she realized that everything she had prepared to say, every line she had rehearsed, every feeling she had held back, seemed to vanish, leaving her only with the raw, undeniable emotion of seeing him here, real, alive, and looking at her in a way that stirred memories she had tried to keep dormant. Marcus spoke first, his voice low, steady, yet carrying an edge of vulnerability and hurt she remembered from so many years ago, a voice that made her feel both safe and exposed, saying, "All those years, I kept wondering, did you ever mean it, or did you just enjoy the time?" And her chest tightened with a mixture of guilt and longing, the words piercing her heart, because she knew that no matter how much she had loved him, no matter how deeply the memory of their time together had lingered, the years of separation and silence had left their mark, creating doubt, fear, and the possibility that the love they once shared might be questioned, misunderstood, or dismissed entirely. She remembered how they had spent countless afternoons talking about everything and nothing, the way his hand had always found hers at the perfect moment, the gentle teasing, the laughter that had filled her soul, the quiet confessions in the darkness, and the nights that had seemed infinite, filled with a passion and tenderness that she had never experienced before or since, and she realized that all of those moments, though long past, had been etched into her being, forming a foundation of emotion that no amount of time could erase, yet now she had to convey it in a way that words alone might never fully capture. As she opened her mouth to speak, her voice caught in her throat, and she realized how much she feared that any explanation would sound inadequate, how any confession might be judged, questioned, or doubted, and how vulnerable she was to his perception of her after all these years, yet she also knew that remaining silent was impossible, that the truth of her love, her longing, and her regret demanded to be voiced, even if the words trembled, even if the conversation brought tears, awkwardness, or pain. The cafe around them seemed to shrink as they sat in tense proximity, each glance, each subtle gesture, laden with meaning, and Clara could feel the history between them pressing into the present, a reminder that time could not erase emotion, that distance could not diminish memory, and that love, even after decades, still held the power to affect them profoundly, reshaping their thoughts, their feelings, and the way they saw each other now. Marcus shifted slightly, his hand brushing against hers accidentally, and she felt the spark, the echo of old feelings that had never truly vanished, and she was reminded of the nights when touch alone had communicated more than words, when his fingers entwined with hers had conveyed reassurance, passion, and an unspoken promise that they had both understood without saying a thing, a memory that now returned with astonishing clarity, making her heart race, her breath catch, and her thoughts spiral into a mix of nostalgia, longing, and fear. They began to speak cautiously, each word measured but filled with emotion, Marcus sharing pieces of his life, Clara offering glimpses into hers, both navigating the delicate dance of reconnecting while honoring the time lost, acknowledging the love they had shared, and carefully exploring the possibility that some connection might remain, despite the decades of absence, despite the lives they had built apart, and despite the uncertainties that now hovered over every sentence, every glance, and every pause. Clara found herself laughing softly at a memory Marcus recounted, the sound of her own laughter surprising her with its ease and warmth, reminding her of the joy they had once brought each other, the way their presence alone had been enough to lift spirits in calm storms, and she realized that even after decades, the comfort and familiarity of their bond remained, as if the years had only deepened the resonance of their connection, creating a rich tapestry of emotion that was impossible to ignore. At one point, Marcus looked down, his expression troubled, and Clara sensed the old wounds, the doubts, the regrets, and the fears that had never fully healed, and she reached for his hand, tentatively, letting her fingers rest against his, a silent reassurance that transcended words, a gesture full of unspoken understanding, apology, and affirmation that she had loved him then, and still did in ways she could barely articulate, and as he looked into her eyes, she saw a flicker of recognition, surprise, and emotion that made her heart swell with both hope and uncertainty. The conversation meandered through laughter, tears, shared memories, and moments of quiet reflection, each pause heavy with meaning, each glance carrying the weight of years spent apart, and Clara realized that the path to understanding, forgiveness, and connection was delicate and slow, requiring honesty, vulnerability, and courage, but also that the mere act of being in the same space, sharing presence, and acknowledging the past, was itself a powerful step toward reconciliation, or at least toward mutual understanding. She remembered how many times they had imagined futures together, how many dreams had been whispered in secret, and how life had altered those paths in ways they could never have foreseen, and she felt a bittersweet mix of pride, regret, and longing for what had been, for what could have been, and for the fragile possibility of what might still exist, however different it might look now. Marcus's eyes searched hers constantly, seeking confirmation, reassurance, and perhaps, forgiveness, and Clara understood that he needed to know that her feelings had been real, that her love had been genuine, and that the years of separation had not diminished the intensity or authenticity of what they had shared, even if life had demanded they part, and she found herself speaking carefully, her voice soft but resolute, sharing memories, emotions, and truths that had been buried within her for decades, realizing that the vulnerability of telling him the depth of her feelings was terrifying but necessary, and that only honesty could bridge the gap between the past and the present. The hours passed quickly as they sat together, the cafe slowly filling with other patrons, the sunlight shifting through the windows, yet they remained absorbed in one another, in the delicate reconstruction of trust, understanding, and emotional intimacy, and Clara felt the incredible weight and beauty of these moments, realizing that love is rarely simple, that time cannot erase genuine emotion, and that the act of facing the past, with all its pain and beauty, could bring unexpected clarity, healing, and connection, even decades later. She reflected on the mistakes, the misunderstandings, the choices that had driven them apart, and she understood that while nothing could undo the past, everything they were saying, feeling, and touching now could create a new space, a new understanding, where love and respect could coexist with memory, longing, and the lessons they had learned separately, and that this space, fragile as it was still theirs to claim, moment by moment. And as the day wore on, as the conversation wound through the familiar and the unfamiliar, the laughter and the tears, Clara realized that this meeting, however tentative, however uncertain, was a turning point. A chance to reconnect with a part of herself that had been dormant, to face Marcus not as the young woman she had once been but as the woman she had become, and to honor the love, mistakes, and memories that had defined them both, understanding that while the past could never be recreated, its meaning, its emotion, and its influence could be acknowledged, celebrated, and perhaps transformed into something lasting, honest, and profoundly human, leaving both of them forever changed, aware that the journey was far from over, but that the first step, seeing each other, speaking the truth, and feeling again, had been taken, and that it was a step neither of them would forget. The days and weeks that followed Clara and Marcus's first face-to-face meeting passed in a blur of emotions, conversations, and quiet, stolen moments that carried the weight of decades, and every interaction seemed charged with an intensity that neither of them had anticipated, as if time itself had bent to remind them of what had been lost, and what might still be possible. They met in parks where the autumn leaves swirled around them, in cafes where the smell of coffee and pastry mixed with the hum of distant chatter, in quiet corners of libraries where whispered conversations felt like secret confessions, and in Clara's apartment where familiar memories of their youth collided gently with the reality of their present selves, creating a delicate tension that was both exhilarating and terrifying. And every time their hands brushed, every time their eyes met, the long-ago spark reignited, a reminder that love, once rooted, can endure far beyond what reason or circumstance might dictate. Clara found herself laughing freely again, a sound that surprised even her, a music of joy and relief that she hadn't realized she had missed so deeply, and she realized that despite the years apart, the familiarity between them remained. A language of glances, gestures, and subtle touches that needed no words, a shared history that had been quietly preserved in the deepest corners of their hearts, waiting for this precise moment to awaken. Marcus, too, seemed transformed by the reconnection, softer in some ways, older and wiser, but still possessing that same energy, that same magnetism that had drawn Clara to him in the first place, and she marveled at the paradox of seeing the man she had loved as a young woman, recognizing him fully while also understanding the layers of experience, hardship, and growth that had shaped him into who he was now. He spoke openly of the years he had spent wondering, of the regret, the longing, and the small joys he had remembered, and in doing so, Clara felt the distance of decades dissolve as though the universe had conspired to bring them together, if only for a fleeting, meaningful chapter, full of honesty, vulnerability, and unspoken understanding. They revisited memories together, some of them humorous, some bittersweet, and some painfully poignant, like the time they had gotten lost in a rainstorm and laughed until they were drenched, or the nights when words had failed them but their closeness had spoken volumes. And Clara was struck by the depth of their shared past, the way every memory carried an imprint, a subtle shaping of their souls, that neither distance nor time could erase, and she began to understand that perhaps the most profound aspect of love is its persistence, its ability to linger in quiet corners, to resurface when least expected, and to remind us that even after decades, connection, understanding, and emotion can endure. Conversations between them often turned reflective, as Marcus asked questions she had never anticipated, not in a confrontational way, but in a searching, tentative, deeply human way, wanting to know what she had felt, what she had carried, and how the years had changed her, and Clara, in turn, found herself sharing truths she had never spoken aloud, emotions she had tucked away, and the intimate understanding that while life had altered the course of their love, it had never diminished the authenticity or depth of what they had shared. It was a mutual acknowledgement that some experiences are timeless, eternal in their emotional resonance, and that while they could not reclaim the past, they could honor it, understand it, and allow it to shape their present in a meaningful way. The small gestures became a language in itself, how he would leave notes tucked into her books when he came over, how she would place a hand on his shoulder when his eyes clouded with thought, how they shared quiet cups of tea in the mornings, letting silence speak for them when words seemed insufficient, and every one of these gestures carried more meaning than any grand declaration could, because they were steeped in history, emotion, and the gentle acknowledgement that they had survived the years apart, yet remained profoundly connected, and Clara felt a peace she had not known in decades, a serenity born from the recognition that love can be patient, enduring, and quietly powerful. Yet it was not all smooth. Moments of doubt crept in, small fissures of insecurity, questions about the paths they had taken, the choices that had kept them apart, and the lives they had led without each other, and these moments were painful, filled with hesitation, uncertainty, and the realization that their reconnection could not erase the reality of the years gone by. They argued softly, disagreed over minor things, wrestled with fears and what-ifs, yet every time they did, there was also a tenderness that reminded them that their bond was strong, tempered by experience, and rooted in a truth that had never truly faded, and that even conflict could be a form of intimacy when handled with honesty, respect, and care. Clara often reflected on the contrast between the young love she had experienced and the mature connection she was now navigating, understanding that while the intensity of youth had been unrestrained and consuming, the depth of present-day understanding was richer, gentler, and more sustaining, capable of encompassing the imperfections, the regrets, and the realities of life, and she realized that love evolves, it adapts, and it can become something even more beautiful when given the chance to grow beyond the impulsiveness of youth. Marcus, in turn, shared moments of vulnerability that surprised Clara, glimpses of fear, longing, and introspection that revealed the man beneath the confidence, the one who had loved deeply, suffered silently, and never fully forgotten her, and in these moments, Clara found herself filled with a tenderness that combined admiration, empathy, and an enduring affection that transcended the decades, reaffirming that the essence of their connection was not simply nostalgia but a living, breathing bond that continued to influence their hearts and minds. Slowly, the tension that had accompanied their reunion began to ease, replaced with a sense of quiet understanding, a rhythm of communication, and a shared acknowledgement that while the future was uncertain, the present was theirs to inhabit fully, to savor, and to learn from, and Clara found comfort in this realization, recognizing that sometimes love is not about reclaiming what was lost, but about honoring it, nurturing it in new forms, and allowing it to enrich the lives they were living. Now, their days together became punctuated with moments that felt both ordinary and extraordinary, the walk through the park under the changing leaves, the quiet coffee in the mornings, the evenings spent sharing music, memories, and dreams, and the simple act of being near one another, feeling the resonance of the past and the comfort of the present, and Clara marveled at the paradox of how something that had seemed so distant, so impossible, could feel so immediate, so vital, and so profoundly grounding in her heart. She thought often of the younger version of herself, the one who had loved Marcus with abandon, and she realized that love had matured in her as it had in him, that the passion had evolved into a profound emotional intimacy, that longing had transformed into appreciation, and that the lessons of the intervening years had prepared them to meet again as two people capable of both honesty and deep, compassionate love, unburdened by the naive impulsiveness of youth, yet enriched by the wisdom of experience. And as they shared a quiet evening together, sitting side by side in her apartment, a soft rain tapping against the windowpane, Clara reached for Marcus's hand, feeling the warmth, the history, and the unspoken promise that lingered in the simple touch, and in that moment, she understood that love does not always follow a straight path, that hearts can endure separation, longing, and the passage of decades, and that the beauty of a connection lies not in possession or certainty, but in recognition, respect, and the courage to feel, fully, deeply, and without reservation. Marcus's gaze met hers, tender and steady, filled with acknowledgement, understanding, and an emotion that words could scarcely capture, and Clara felt a flood of gratitude, relief, and quiet joy, knowing that they had arrived at a space where the past could coexist with the present, where love could be celebrated without fear, and where the bond that had defined them both in their youth could now take on a mature, enduring, and profoundly human form. They laughed at shared memories, reminisced about mistakes, reflected on choices, and allowed silences to carry meaning, feeling the depth of connection that had survived the years, and Clara realized that this journey, though unexpected and full of uncertainty, was a testament to the power of love, the resilience of the human heart, and the beauty of embracing emotion fully, without shame or reservation. And in the quiet of that evening, as the rain continued to fall softly outside, Clara understood that while they could not reclaim the past, they could honor it, live it, and carry its meaning forward, embracing the love that had never truly left. And in that understanding, both she and Marcus felt a profound peace, a gentle closure, and a renewed sense of connection that promised hope, tenderness, and a lasting emotional bond, leaving them forever changed, not by the years they had lost, but by the love that had endured.